Fox Sports 910, Benjamin Garcia filling in for Jody Ayler today on The Drive. We got a lot of things to talk about. We also have a giveaway on today's edition of The Drive. We will be giving that Diamondbacks family 4-pack of tickets later on in the show. A 4-pack of tickets to the D-backs game on July 13th. D-backs fans join the D-backs for Star Wars Night at Chase Field on July 13th as they face the Toronto Blue Jays. The first 20,000 fans in attendance will receive the Lourdes Gurriel Stormtrooper Bobble, courtesy of Cox. Secure tickets now at dbacks.com/tickets. Listen, you've heard my opinion over the last 2.5 hours or so, how I feel about Monte Morris, how I feel about the Suns offseason as a whole. Let's bring in another impartial third party, Mike Vigil, the co-host of the Timeline podcast of also Sam Cooper's on that show. You've heard him as on this show as well. So, Mike, good morning, man. How you doing?
Hey, Benjamin. Thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
It's good to talk with you guys. You know, we talked to Sam last week everything the Suns have done in free agency, pre-Suns draft. And then we're talking with you, right? Post all those things. So let me ask you, just as a whole, and then we'll get more specific in just a second here. Whether it was the Ryan Dunn acquisition, what was trading back, accumulating picks, and getting Ryan Dunn, whether it was Monte Morris, how would you grade the Suns draft and free agency so far? Is it just a clear-cut A, or is it still a lot of work to do for this Suns team with really just one roster spot left?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because you kind of have to grade them on a curve a little bit because of the restrictions that have been applied to them due to being in the second apron and having those inflated salaries all across the roster. So overall, if you factor all of that in, I think they've done well so far. I do think they're still missing like taller shooters. They need some sort of wing players that can shoot on this team so far. So being that they haven't quite solved that, I would probably say it's around a B, but their ability to take their depleted assets in picks and turn them into more assets in picks, I think was the right move. And, you know, Ryan Dunn seems like a good player for them. And Guitarro, if he works out, would be a good player for them if they find ways to work them in. And now that they have a G League team, maybe they can find ways to work them in. So overall, I think they've done a good job. I'm really interested to see what they do with the last one or two roster spots, or if they can find a way maybe to trade and get another roster spot. I would like to see what they do to finish it off. They could probably bump it up to an A.
So, you know, let me ask you this then. With the Ryan Dunn or the second round acquisition of the Suns, who I'm just going to call Oso because I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name and butcher it on the air, how much do you expect both of those guys to come in and contribute right away? I even said earlier in the show that I would start Ryan Dunn because the fastest way to maturity in a guy that is going to have to play real playoff minutes for this team is throwing him in the fire and having him figure it out on the fly. Do you expect both of these guys, or at least one of them, to be playing real playoff rotational minutes? And are they going to be seen as players that need to help this team win a championship like right now?
Well, I tend to have lower expectations for first-year rookies that aren't picked higher, especially if they're not like 24, 5-year college guys. So I try to have lower expectations, give them the opportunity to exceed those expectations. As far as Ryan Dunn goes, starting him would be interesting because he obviously is limited offensively. So if you can find a way to put him into lineups where that's not going to be required of him, he doesn't have to be somebody who needs to contribute at a high level offensively right away, that would make sense. So putting him in the starting lineup where he's surrounded by pretty good offensive players would make sense. I will say, though, the Stars need to shoot more threes if they're surrounded by a guy who can't shoot threes at all. So that would help a lot if the Stars find a way to contribute offensively a little differently and provide spacing for a guy who probably is either going to be screening or in the dunker spot, not going to spend a ton of time behind the three-point line. So that could work potentially. Iguodala, I think, is a little different. I think you probably look at him as more of a longer-term prospect, somebody who might spend more time in the G League and could find a way, especially if there are any injuries on this team, to play in the NBA, but probably will take a little bit more time to develop. I think Dunn, he probably has one solid NBA skill right now, which is defense. And having one solid NBA skill means you can probably find a way onto the court right away. How much he can contribute, I think, still remains to be seen. In the right kind of lineups, I think you could probably maximize him pretty well right away.
Yeah, my whole thing with that is just the Ryan Dunn ability to be able to potentially come in and just be a stifling defender. You know, we saw scouts literally compare him to being one of the best defensive players they've ever seen in the draft. Now, the issue is he literally cannot shoot a lick. So I feel like it would match well with that team. You know, speaking of matching well, Bradley Beal, I feel like in the Suns starting lineup just doesn't match. I get it. It sounds crazy to throw a guy who makes $50 million on the bench. But wouldn't everything just flow a little better if Monte Morris got the start, Devin Booker at the 2, Ryan Dunn at the 3, and his job is really just defense there, Kevin Durant and Yusuf Nurkic? Or am I insane? Is it dumb to spread the wealth around and have Royce O'Neal and Bradley Beal come off the bench and just go straight Wizards Bradley Beal? Is this This is something I've been championing for like 6 months now. Am I crazy to have a guy that makes $50 million come off the bench?
It's not crazy. You know, I would think if the NBA didn't have Manu Ginobili in it at any point, then maybe it would sound a little crazier. But we've seen it work in the past with a player that's probably an all-star level coming off the bench. But I do think that it took a very specific kind of culture, and it took a very specific kind of player to be willing to do that. Now, I think just as a lineup on the floor, having a more traditional pass point guard, assist to turnover king like Monte Morris in the starting lineup and Bradley Beal being like a super six man makes sense. But I think in the long run, if the big three doesn't work, while all three of them are on the court, the whole team is cooked. It doesn't work in general. So if I look at last season and I say it didn't work, I think that's true. Like there were times where it looked good. There were times where it didn't look good. It never looked great. Like it never clicked in a way where everyone could say, I see the vision. This is going to work. So if you're saying it's not going to work this season, you have a lot of evidence in your favor to say that. But I do think that the coach maybe wasn't quite respected by the players enough for the players to sacrifice in the way that they needed to in order for all of it to work. So at the very least, with a new coach, a potential new offensive system, I would like to see how it works with the big three on the floor before they make any sweeping decisions like that. Because if it does work, it could probably work at a really high level. Now, you can make the case at this point, maybe they need to start with a point guard. Now, they're going to sacrifice a lot of size, but right now, as far as the wing goes, there is no size on the roster unless you're starting Bol. So, you know, if you start Monte Morris at point guard and now all of a sudden Devin Booker is playing the small forward, then okay, we'll see how that works as well. Now, it might not be great defensively, but I think it would be interesting offensively. You know, so they have options, but the big three ultimately needs to gel.
You know, I might be getting irritating on social media the way I have been defending Yusuf Nurkic, and I want to get back to Monte Morris in just a second, but you mentioned the size. Suns fans, it seems like on social media, I don't know if you're one of these guys, so maybe I'm calling you out as well on the show, but why are Suns fans so eager to have a glaring hole at center when at this point the Suns are already small, defensively they're not great, and so for me, like the Yusuf Nurkic thing is just pure insanity to me because there's no other better options on the market right now. And do you really want to get rid of that 2031 pick for Nick Richards? Or do you want to wait till the deadline, see what a possible Grayson Allen and first-round pick can get you, and just leave the Nurkic thing alone for a guy that, I understand, can be infuriating? There's not much better on the market right now. Where are you on the Yusuf Nurkic front?
Well, I think if you could find the right trade, I'd be okay with it. But I also think if you're talking about the reason Suns fans turn their ire towards Yusuf Nurkic, I think it's pretty simple. Matt Ishbia is on the record saying, we're not trading any of the big three. So if you start from the perspective of all three of these guys are staying, the team is stuck with these three guys, whether it works or not, well, then you go to who's the next guy to blame, because as a Suns fan, you don't want to talk about the guys who can't be moved right now anyway. So, you know, in some ways, Suns fans have been training to blame the center for years and years and years. So at this point, Yusuf Nurkic taking some heat makes sense. Now, I will say, he's the only one that rebounds on the team right now, or at least he was last season. I think Plumlee's going to help with some rebounding. And, Kevin Durant can rebound, but for his size, he's kind of a lower level rebounder. So you kind of need him right now. He sets screens, he makes passes. He has the ability of helping up the offense. They were pretty good with him on the floor all last season, but he did fail pretty dramatically in the playoffs, Yusuf Nurkic. So I understand why people are looking for other options out there. But Nick Richards, to your point, that's not it. He's not very good. He's just not that good of a player.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for following through with that. I appreciate that. The Nurkic thing, and you had mentioned as well, just really quickly, the Kevin Durant thing, you said a bad rebounder or not as great for his size. 0 offensive rebounds against the Minnesota Timberwolves in the series. That's where Kevin Durant was. So you mentioned the Yusuf Nurkic thing, the rebounding. It's a real key for the Suns. Lastly, the Monte Morris acquisition, I kind of want to go back to that. Let's just play it how it's supposed to play, right? He comes off the bench. He's the stable guy, the point guard. What are your expectations for Monte Morris? And can he actually lift this team so much so that didn't even have a point guard last year, basically changing their destiny to a team that might actually be championship contenders? Where are you on the Monte Morris front?
Well, at the very least, we know that Devin Booker's probably going to miss time in the regular season. We know that Bradley Beal is probably going to miss time in the regular season. So having a solid guard that can step in and be effective, not turn the ball over, help run the offense, set guys up to score, is going to be really helpful in the regular season. Now, he is, a little bit undersized. He's a small guy. He's a guard. So how much he can contribute in the playoffs, how much he impacts, how good the team can be in the playoffs remains to be seen. I think he still will help. I mean, we're talking about a team last year, if we're just comparing last year to this year, that didn't have a point guard at all, like nobody off the bench. Now, that never really made sense to me. Having at least one point guard on the roster seems to make sense if there are injuries. So I think he's going to help right away, especially in the regular season. They're going to have guys who can effectively run the offense when one of the stars is off the floor. Now, I just don't know how much he raises the overall ceiling of the team. But a floor raiser is still good, too, because they can get potentially into that top 4, have home court advantage in the playoffs. Maybe that can help them a little bit.
Mike Vigil, the Timeline Podcast, Sam Cooper, the other half of the Timeline Podcast. You've heard them both. Mike Vigil today on the show, covering all things Suns. We'll be following. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on today, Mike. We really appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks, Benjamin.